The ranch sat alone under a wide sky, far from towns, far from voices, far from comfort. The land was dry but honest. It gave back only what a man was willing to work for. The rancher had lived there for many years, long enough for silence to feel normal, and for loneliness to become a quiet companion that followed him everywhere. His days began before sunrise and ended after dark. He fed the animals, repaired fences, checked water lines, and worked until his hands were rough and his back ached. At night, the wind spoke more than people ever did. He was not a bitter man. He was calm, steady, and patient. But even the strongest people feel the weight of being alone for too long. There was no family left to visit him. His parents had passed years ago, and his siblings had moved east, chasing easier lives. Letters came less and less. Eventually, they stopped. The rancher understood why. Life on the frontier was not for everyone. Still, understanding did not remove the emptiness. Sometimes, when the work was done and the stars filled the sky, he would sit on the wooden steps of his cabin and imagine another presence beside him. Not romance from books, not grand love stories, just someone who would listen, who would share a meal, who would make the cabin feel warm again. He wanted partnership more than passion, someone to build a life with. Even if life was hard, in nearby settlements, people talked about mail-order marriages. It was not a strange idea in those days. Many men lived far from towns, and many women wanted stability and safety. Letters were exchanged, promises were made, and sometimes a new life began. Sometimes it failed, but sometimes it worked. The rancher listened quietly whenever the topic came up. He did not speak much, but he remembered every word. For months, he argued with himself. He was not a man who rushed into decisions. He worried about disappointment, about responsibility, about whether he could truly be what another person needed. But the loneliness kept returning, heavier each season. Winter nights felt longer, meals felt shorter, silence felt louder. One evening, after a long day of repairing storm damage, he sat at his small table with a single lamp burning low. He took out paper and ink. His hand paused above the page for a long time. Then he began to write. His letter was simple and honest. He wrote about the land, the work, the weather, and the quiet life he lived. He did not promise luxury or ease. He promised effort, fairness, and respect. He asked for companionship, not perfection. When he finished, he read the letter twice. It sounded like him. That mattered. He folded it carefully and prepared it for posting. The next trip to town took a full day by horse. He delivered the letter and returned to the ranch with nothing but hope and doubt riding beside him. Weeks passed. The rancher tried not to think about it, but every time the road appeared in the distance, his eyes lingered. One afternoon, a reply finally arrived. The letter was brief. It confirmed an arrangement and gave a date of arrival. Details were few. The rancher noticed that the handwriting did not match what he expected, but he did not question it. Mail was slow. Mistakes happened. What mattered was that someone was coming. From that day on, the rancher prepared. He fixed the roof where it leaked. He built a second bed frame from spare wood. He cleaned the cabin more carefully than he ever had before. He even planted a small patch of flowers near the door. Unsure why, only knowing it felt right. As the arrival day grew closer, his thoughts became restless. He wondered what kind of person would arrive. Would she like the quiet? Would she hate the dust and long days? Would she leave as soon as she could? He pushed the thoughts away and focused on the work. Work had always kept his worries in line. The morning of the expected arrival, the rancher woke before dawn. He dressed slowly, washed his face, and stood for a moment looking at his reflection in the small mirror. He looked older than he felt. Lines marked his face, carved by sun and wind. Still, there was strength in his eyes. He hoped it would be enough. He waited near the road, sitting on his horse, scanning the horizon. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Then, at last, a figure appeared in the distance. The shape was large, much larger than he expected. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. As the figure drew closer, his heart began to beat faster. It was not a woman. The man approaching was tall, broad, and powerful. His presence impossible to ignore. He carried himself with calm confidence. Not aggression, not fear. His clothing was worn but cared for. His eyes were dark and steady. He looked like someone who had walked far and survived much. The rancher felt a rush of confusion, followed by fear he did not want to admit. His hand tightened on the reins. This was not what he had prepared for. This was not what he had imagined. Every story he had heard, every warning whispered by others, rose up in his mind all at once. He reminded himself to breathe. The stranger stopped several steps away. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not raise his voice. He stood still, waiting. That alone unsettled the rancher more than any threat would have. Silence stretched between them, thick and uncertain. Finally, the stranger spoke. His words were slow but clear. He explained that he had come because of an agreement. He had traveled far. He had nowhere else to go. There had been confusion in the messages, confusion created by people who did not fully understand either side. He did not accuse, he simply stated facts. The rancher listened, trying to make sense of it. A mistake had been made. One that could not be undone easily. Anger flickered inside him, but it had no clear target. The stranger before him looked tired, not dangerous. Strong, yes, but not hostile. The rancher faced a choice he had not expected. He could turn the man away, send him back into uncertainty, or he could offer shelter, at least for the night, until things could be sorted out. The law was far away. So were clear answers. After a long pause, the rancher nodded. He did not know why. Maybe it was fairness. Maybe it was the memory of his own loneliness. He offered food and water. The stranger accepted with quiet gratitude. They walked toward the cabin together. Two men brought together by misunderstanding and fate. Neither knew what the coming days would bring. Fear and caution remained, but so did something else. Something small but important. A shared understanding that survival on the frontier often depended on choices made in moments like this. As the door of the cabin closed behind them, the rancher realized that his life had already changed. The future he imagined was gone, replaced by something uncertain and unexpected. Yet, for the first time in a long while, the silence inside the cabin felt different. Not empty, not peaceful, but alive with possibility. The night passed slowly. The rancher lay awake on his bed, staring at the wooden ceiling while the wind brushed against the cabin walls. Across the room, the stranger slept on the second bed the rancher had built with hopeful hands. The space between them felt wider than the room itself. Every small sound made the rancher tense, but nothing happened. No sudden movement, no threat. Only quiet breathing and the soft crackle of the dying fire. When morning came, light slipped through the small window and touched the floor. The rancher rose first. He moved carefully, not wanting to startle the man. He stepped outside, filled a bucket with water, and washed his face. The cool air helped clear his thoughts, but confusion still sat heavy in his chest. This situation was not part of any plan. Still, the day demanded work, and work had always given him direction. When he returned inside, the stranger was awake, sitting calmly on the edge of the bed. He nodded in greeting. The rancher nodded back. Words felt difficult, so they began the morning in silence. The rancher prepared a simple meal: bread, beans, and coffee. He placed food on the table and stepped back. The stranger waited, watching the rancher's actions before sitting down. That small gesture showed respect, and the rancher noticed it. They ate quietly. The rancher studied the man across from him. He was indeed much larger, taller, and stronger, but there was no arrogance in him. His movements were careful, His eyes stayed alert but not sharp. He looked like someone used to watching the world closely, not someone looking to control it. After the meal, the rancher finally spoke. He asked the man's name. The stranger gave it. The sound of it was unfamiliar, but the rancher repeated it slowly, trying to say it right. The stranger nodded again, appreciation clear in his expression. He then asked the rancher's name and repeated it with equal care. That small exchange softened the air between them. They spoke more after that, slowly and carefully, choosing words that would not be misunderstood. The stranger explained his journey in simple terms. He had lost his home to events beyond his control. Promises had been made by people who handled the arrangements. He believed he was agreeing to work, to protection, to a chance to rebuild his life. He had not fully understood the final details until it was too late to turn back. The rancher listened without interrupting. He felt anger toward the unseen people who had allowed such confusion, but not toward the man in front of him. Still, fear had not fully left him. He had grown up hearing stories that painted people like this stranger as danger itself. Those stories now felt weak when faced with a real person, sitting at his table, asking for nothing but honesty. Outside, the ranch waited. Animals needed care. Fences needed checking. The rancher hesitated, then invited the stranger to walk with him. He did not give orders. He simply said he had work to do. The stranger stood and followed. As they moved across the land, the rancher watched closely. He expected mistakes, perhaps refusal. Instead, the stranger observed everything carefully. He learned quickly. He lifted heavy loads with ease, repaired broken wood with skill, and moved across the land as if he understood it deeply. There was no wasted effort in his movements. The rancher could not deny what he saw. This man was capable. More than capable. By midday, they had completed work that usually took the rancher much longer alone. Still, tension lingered. Neither fully trusted the other, but neither showed disrespect. At one point, a calf wandered too far from its mother and became stuck near uneven ground. The rancher rushed forward, worried. Before he could act, the stranger stepped in calmly, guiding the animal back without panic or force. The mother followed. Crisis ended as quietly as it began. The rancher felt something shift inside him. As the sun lowered, they rested near a tree. The stranger spoke of the land he once knew. He did not speak with anger, only memory. He spoke of seasons, of shared work, of respect for nature. The rancher found himself listening closely. These ideas were not so different from his own beliefs. Different words, same meaning. That night, the rancher offered the stranger a place to stay for a few more days. He explained that he needed time to understand what could be done next. The stranger accepted without argument. Gratitude showed in his face, but he did not overstep. He kept his distance, honoring the space given to him. Days passed. Each day brought shared work and quiet understanding. Still, fear from the outside world lingered. The rancher worried about what others would say if they found out. He worried about trouble, about judgment, about safety. He had lived by clear rules for a long time. This situation blurred them. One afternoon, riders appeared on the far edge of the land. The rancher stiffened. He had not invited anyone. The stranger noticed his reaction and stayed back, not wanting to cause alarm. The riders did not approach the cabin, but their presence reminded the rancher how fragile this peace was. That evening, the rancher spoke honestly. He said he could not promise long-term shelter without knowing the risks. He did not want trouble for either of them. The stranger listened carefully. He did not argue. He said he understood fear. He had lived with it for a long time. He only asked for fairness. That word stayed with the rancher long after the conversation ended. Fairness. He realized that was what he had always tried to live by. Turning this man away without giving him a chance would go against everything he believed. That night, the rancher slept more deeply than he had since the stranger arrived. When he woke, he knew a decision was forming inside him, even if he was not ready to speak it yet. The situation was still uncertain, still risky. But one thing had become clear. The man who arrived at his ranch was not the danger he had imagined. He was simply another soul caught in a hard world, looking for a place to stand. And the rancher, who had once waited for companionship in one form, now faced the truth that life sometimes delivered what was needed, not what was expected. The days slowly began to settle into a pattern. Morning came with the same pale light, the same sounds of animals waking, and the same quiet space between the two men. But something inside that space had changed. It was no longer filled only with caution. It now carried routine. And routine has a way of building trust without asking permission. The rancher noticed it first in small ways. The stranger rose early without being asked. He checked the animals, repaired small problems before they became large ones, and worked until the sun stood high. He did not try to take control. He waited, watched, and helped where help was needed. The rancher found himself relying on him without meaning to. Work on the ranch was never easy. The land tested anyone who tried to live on it. A dry spell came, and water had to be managed carefully. Fences weakened under pressure from wandering animals. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in, fast and heavy. The wind howled, and rain fell hard. The two men worked side by side, securing loose boards and guiding animals to shelter. There was no time for words, only action. They moved together, without planning, as if they had worked this land together for years. When the storm passed, both were soaked and tired. They stood under the clearing sky, breathing hard. The rancher looked at the stranger and gave a short nod. It was not a smile, but it carried meaning. The stranger returned it. In that moment, something solid formed between them. That evening, as they sat near the fire, the stranger spoke more openly than before. He talked about skills learned from elders, about reading the land, about patience. He spoke of loss too, but gently, without blame. The rancher listened, adding small pieces of his own story. He talked about growing up on the ranch, about his parents teaching him to work with care, not force. Their lives were different, yet strangely similar. Still, challenges came from outside. One day, a trader stopped by unexpectedly. The rancher's heart tightened. He watched carefully, unsure how the situation would unfold. The stranger stayed in the background, calm and respectful. The trader asked questions, glanced around, and eventually left. No trouble followed, but the rancher felt the pressure of the world beyond his land pushing closer. That night, the rancher could not sleep. He thought about the risk he was taking. He thought about safety, about reputation, about the fragile peace they had built. At the same time, he thought about the work done, the quiet respect shown, and the empty cabin he once dreaded returning to. Now, the silence felt shared. The next morning, a problem arose that tested everything. Several animals had broken through a weak section of fence and wandered toward rough ground. Losing them would mean serious trouble. The rancher and the stranger set out quickly. The land was uneven, and time mattered. The stranger moved with confidence, guiding the animals back without panic. The rancher followed, trusting him fully in that moment. By the time the animals were safe, the rancher knew the truth. This man was no longer just a guest. He had become a part of the life here. Later that day, the rancher spoke plainly. He said the stranger could stay longer. Not just for days, but for as long as he wished. As long as respect remained on both sides. The stranger listened carefully. His response was simple. He thanked the rancher and promised to honor the land and the home. There were no grand speeches. None were needed. As weeks passed, the ranch changed in ways the rancher had not expected. Work was lighter, not because there was less of it, but because it was shared. Meals lasted longer. Silence became comfortable. Sometimes they spoke of the future. Sometimes they sat without words. Both felt equal in those moments. The rancher realized that the loneliness he once carried had loosened its grip. It had not vanished, but it no longer controlled him. He had gained something deeper than what he originally sought. He had gained trust. The stranger, too, found peace. He no longer slept lightly. He laughed quietly at small moments. He took pride in the land, as if it were his own. He did not forget his past, but it no longer defined him. Together, they stood against the challenges of the frontier. Not as strangers brought together by mistake, but as partners shaped by choice. The ranch had become more than land and labor. It had become a place of belonging. Neither man spoke of how unusual their meeting had been. It no longer mattered. What mattered was what they built after it. And as the seasons shifted, one truth became clear to both of them. Sometimes, life takes a wrong turn, only to lead to the right place. The final season arrived quietly. There was no clear moment when everything changed, no loud sign that life had reached a turning point. Instead, change came the way it often does on the frontier, slow, steady, and honest. The ranch stood the same under the open sky, but the feeling within it was different. It was no longer a place built only for survival. It had become a place shaped by trust. The rancher noticed this one morning as he watched the sun rise over the land. He was not alone on the porch. The other man stood a short distance away, checking the animals, moving with care and purpose. The sight filled the rancher with a quiet sense of relief. He realized that he no longer felt the weight of every responsibility pressing only on his shoulders. The work, the worry, the future, these things were now shared. Over time, the ranch began to improve. Repairs that had been delayed for years were finally completed. The land was managed more wisely. Water was conserved better. Animals were healthier. None of this came from force or control. It came from cooperation and respect. Each man brought his own knowledge, and neither tried to prove himself better than the other. Word slowly spread among nearby travelers and traders that the ranch was well run. A few people stopped by more often, looking for honest trade or short-term work. The rancher watched carefully at first, but no trouble followed. The presence of two strong, fair men working together seemed to discourage problems before they began. One evening, after a long day, the two men sat near the fire outside. The stars were bright, and the air was calm. The rancher spoke about the future, something he had avoided for a long time. He said the land could grow, that more animals could be added, that perhaps the ranch could become a place others relied on. The other man listened closely. He did not interrupt. When he spoke, he said he would stay and help as long as he was welcome. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because this place now felt like home. That word home stayed with the rancher. For years, home had felt like a structure he lived in, not a feeling he carried. Now, it felt real again. Built not from walls, but from shared effort and understanding. Challenges still came. Hard seasons always do. One year, the weather tested the land. Crops struggled. Supplies ran low. But instead of fear, the rancher felt determination. They planned carefully. They adjusted. They endured. And when the season passed, the ranch remained standing, stronger for it. The rancher began to understand something important. He had once believed that his happiness depended on a single idea he had carried for years. He had thought he needed one specific answer to his loneliness. But life had shown him that belonging can take many forms. It does not always arrive the way it is expected. Sometimes, it arrives disguised as a mistake. The other man also changed. He became more open, more settled. He shared stories of his past not with pain, but with balance. He spoke of lessons learned, of respect for the land, of the importance of standing firm without closing one's heart. The rancher listened and learned. In many ways, they taught each other. As time passed, the ranch became known as a place of fairness. People who worked there were treated well, trades were honest, promises were kept. The rancher took pride in this reputation, knowing it was built not by strength alone, but by character. One quiet afternoon, as they repaired a fence together, the rancher realized something else. He was no longer waiting for life to begin. It had already begun. The days were full, meaningful, and shared. The silence he once feared had transformed into peace. There was no need for grand declarations between them. No ceremony to define what they had built. It existed in the daily work, in shared meals, in quiet evenings under the stars. It existed in trust. Years later, when people asked the rancher how his life turned out, he would speak simply. He would say that he learned an important lesson, that expectations can limit us, but acceptance can change everything. He would say that family is not always formed the way stories promise, but it can be just as real. The ranch remained, strong against the wide land. Two lives, once shaped by loneliness and loss, now stood rooted in purpose. Together, they had turned uncertainty into stability and misunderstanding into respect. And in the end, the rancher understood the truth that had taken him a lifetime to learn. Sometimes, what you wait for is not what you need, but what arrives instead can be even better.